What if I told you that slashing interest rates is like giving a sugar rush to a diabetic economy? Tempting, isn't it? But let's dive into the meat of it. Interest rate cuts are a tool wielded by central banks to stimulate economic activity. By making borrowing cheaper, they aim to encourage spending and investment. Picture it like this. The economy is a sluggish old car, and lowering interest rates is akin to flooring the gas pedal, hoping for a boost. Central banks like the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank use this tool to jolt their economies awake. The 2008 financial crisis was a prime example. The Federal Reserve dramatically reduced the federal funds rate from 5.25% to near zero within a year, trying to jumpstart a staggering economy. It was a desperate yet calculated gamble to spark life into financial markets and consumer confidence. Similarly, the European Central Bank pushed its main refinancing rate to a mere 0.05% in 2014 to combat low inflation and stagnant growth. But, here's where things get sticky. The quick fix of cutting rates can morph into a long-term dependency, akin to a caffeine addict needing ever stronger brews to get through the day. Over time, economies might find themselves in a predicament, addicted to low rates, struggling to cope with even a slight uptick. Moreover, there's the looming specter of inflation. When money is cheap, it can flood the economy, inflating prices and creating bubbles just waiting to pop. It's like overwatering a plant until it drowns. The situation becomes even more precarious when rates can't be cut any further. What do you do when zero is your floor? Central banks then turn to quantitative easing, an enigma of financial wizardry that involves buying government bonds to increase money supply. The Bank of Japan embarked on this journey in 2001, pioneering a path others would reluctantly follow. So the question isn't just about the efficacy of rate cuts, but about the long-term consequences of leaning on this crutch. What happens when the world is addicted to low rates? When the sugar rush ends and the crash looms? But before we spiral into the abyss, let's explore the next chapter of economic alchemy, quantitative easing. A tool born from necessity, it aims to do what rate cuts can't, inject life into a stagnant economy when traditional methods fall short. Imagine this, you're sitting by a money printer, churning out bills until the ink runs dry. Feels irresponsible, doesn't it? Yet, this is the essence of quantitative easing, a tool central banks use when interest rates are stuck at the bottom of the barrel. When the financial world teeters on the edge and cutting rates further is like squeezing water from a stone, central banks bring out the big guns, QE. It's not as wild as it sounds. It involves buying vast amounts of government securities to inject liquidity into the economy. Picture this as opening the floodgates, letting cash flow into the financial system, and hoping it trickles down through loans, investments, and spending. But here's the catch. Like giving kids a sugar rush, there's always the risk of a crash, or worse, a sugar-induced frenzy leading to economic distortions. Take the Bank of Japan's bold move in 2001. Facing deflation and sluggish growth, they took the pioneering step into QE territory. Back then, it was as controversial as trying to teach a cat to fetch. Skeptics were plenty, but desperation sometimes breeds innovation. Japan's gamble was a roadmap for others when they found themselves caught in the same trap. Fast forward to 2020, and the Federal Reserve embraced QE full throttle during the COVID-19 pandemic, buying $120 billion in securities monthly. It was like throwing a lifeline in stormy seas. Markets stabilized, but it wasn't without concerns. Too much liquidity, and we risk inflating bubbles or encouraging reckless risk-taking. The line between aid and addiction becomes perilously thin. Now, here's where it gets murkier. What if banks, sitting on piles of cash, decide to hold on tight and not lend? This is where QE hits a wall. The money's there, but it's like a car stalled with a full tank of gas. Enter the world of emergency lending facilities, designed to pry open the lending coffers when the usual methods fall flat. And just like that, we're at another crossroads. What happens when banks still play it safe, hoarding cash like doomsday preppers? Stay tuned as we dive into the realm of emergency lending facilities, where the solutions get even more creative and sometimes desperate. What if banks could just dial up a hotline when they're sinking in a sea of debt? Enter the world of emergency lending facilities, the financial sector's version of a lifeboat, ready to rescue institutions from the swirling currents of economic disaster. These facilities are not just a safety net, they're the high-stakes game changers when the markets spiral into chaos. Picture this. The year is 2008, and banks are crashing like dominoes. The Federal Reserve steps in with its term auction facility, a lifeline that pumped $900 billion into drowning banks. It wasn't just money, it was a shot of adrenaline to a heart on the brink of failure. But like any miracle cure, this comes with side effects. The immediate fix is alluring, but it raises eyebrows about the long-term implications. Are we training banks to be reckless, knowing a safety net is always there? Is this creating a culture of moral hazard, where the fear of failure becomes a distant memory? Emergency lending facilities are designed to stabilize the financial sector, providing targeted credit that acts like a tourniquet on a bleeding economy. They are the unsung heroes in times of crisis, stopping the financial system from flatlining. Yet, there's a darker side to this story. Imagine a world where these lifelines become crutches, fostering dependency and encouraging risky behavior like a daredevil without a parachute. The banks might feel emboldened to tread dangerous waters, knowing they're only a call away from salvation. And what about when the crisis isn't confined to one country? When financial contagion spreads across borders, the plot thickens. We've seen it happen, where a local crisis morphs into a global one, testing the very limits of these emergency measures. This brings us to a tantalizing cliffhanger. What happens when these crises transcend national borders? The answer lies in foreign exchange interventions, the next chapter in our exploration of financial wizardry. So, as the curtain falls on this chapter of emergency lending, we're left pondering the fine line between life-saving intervention and risky over-reliance. Are these financial lifeboats a necessary evil or a ticking time bomb of dependency? The answer might surprise you as we leap into the world of foreign exchange interventions, where currencies dance on the razor's edge of global stability. Can a central bank really control the tides of foreign currency like a puppet master? Picture this: a giant game of chess where the stakes are national economies, and every move could tip the balance between prosperity and chaos. Foreign exchange interventions are the secretive maneuvers that central banks use to keep currencies from spiraling out of control. They aren't just fancy financial tricks. They're a high-stakes dance with the global market, where one false step can lead to a tumble. The primary goal is stabilization. Imagine the horror of waking up to find your currency is worth half of what it was yesterday. Overnight chaos in the markets, and a nightmare for anyone holding that currency. Central banks intervene to prevent such destabilizing capital flows, often by buying or selling large amounts of currency to influence exchange rates. It's like trying to steer a runaway train by leaning out the window and pulling on the tracks with your bare hands. Possible, but certainly not easy. But wait, there's more. These interventions aren't just about stability, they're also about strategy. Central banks employ a mix of tactics like direct buying or selling, adjusting interest rates, or even deploying verbal interventions, essentially scolding markets into line. However, these maneuvers come with their own set of problems. Missteps can lead to currency wars, where countries compete to devalue their currencies to boost exports, stirring up trade tensions that make international relations tenser than a family reunion after a political debate. Take the Swiss National Bank's dramatic intervention in 2011, for instance. Faced with a rapidly appreciating Swiss franc that threatened its economy, the SNB made the bold move to set a minimum exchange rate of 1 Swiss franc and 20 rappen per euro. They committed to buying unlimited foreign currency to maintain this level, essentially drawing a line in the sand and daring the market to cross it. It worked for a while, but when they finally let the peg go in 2015, it caused a financial whirlwind. The franc surged, sending shockwaves through the Swiss economy and beyond. What if banks could suddenly discover billions buried within their own coffers, like finding treasure hidden under the cushions of their plush executive chairs? This isn't a fairy tale, it's the magic of reserve requirement adjustments. Reserve requirements, those arcane rules dictating how much cash banks must hold relative to their deposits, are the unsung gatekeepers of financial stability. Lowering these requirements can unleash a tidal wave of liquidity into the economy, potentially sparking growth faster than a rumor at a high school reunion. Picture it. When the People's Bank of China relaxed its reserve requirements in 2020, it didn't just shuffle some numbers on a spreadsheet. It effectively liberated 550 billion yuan, a cash injection that made the economy buzz like a swarm of bees on a summer's day. Suddenly, businesses could borrow, consumers could spend, and the economic engine roared back to life. It's like giving a sprinter an extra boost just before the finish line. But before you start imagining endless prosperity, consider the risks. Reducing reserve requirements can be akin to giving a teenager a credit card with no spending limit. Sure, the immediate results might be thrilling, new car, anyone? But the long-term consequences can be dire if caution is thrown to the wind. Over-leveraging becomes a real threat, and with it, the specter of financial instability looms large. Take the Federal Reserve's 2012 announcement, for example. By tying its rate decisions to specific unemployment and inflation metrics, the Fed wasn't just playing with numbers, it was orchestrating a symphony of market behaviors. Traders, investors, and even other central banks listened intently as then-Chairman Ben Bernanke spoke, knowing that these words could sway markets and influence economic strategies worldwide. The transparency of this forward guidance added a layer of predictability, calming jittery markets accustomed to the roller coaster of financial speculation. Yet this power isn't without its pitfalls. The very same words that can soothe can also rattle. Misinterpretations can lead to market volatility, sending stock prices tumbling or interest rates soaring. It's like handing a teenager the keys to a Ferrari on a winding mountain road. Exciting, but fraught with danger. Credibility becomes the linchpin in this delicate balance. If markets lose faith in a central bank's words, the guidance crumbles, leaving chaos in its wake. Consider the Bank of England's 2013 forward guidance, which promised not to raise rates until unemployment fell below 7%. Markets appreciated the clarity, but it also exposed the bank to risks if economic conditions changed unexpectedly. Forward guidance requires a deft touch, a bit like tightrope walking while juggling flaming torches, thrilling yet perilous if mishandled. So what happens when national problems spill over internationally? The interconnectedness of modern economies means that a sneeze in Washington can cause a cold in Tokyo. This brings us to the concept of currency swap lines, a tool that central banks use to manage international liquidity crises. Imagine a world where currencies are swapped like kids trading baseball cards. Simple exchanges, but with stakes that span the globe. Currency swap lines, while sounding like something you'd find in a financial wizard's handbook, are actually a crucial tool for maintaining global fiscal stability. They're not just about exchanging money, they're about ensuring that when the financial seas get choppy, countries have a life raft, or at least a very sturdy flotation device. The mechanics are straightforward yet impactful. Central banks agree to exchange their currencies with others to ensure liquidity, especially the kind that flows in US dollars, which are often in short supply during crises. When financial systems start to crack under pressure, as they did in 2008, these swap lines act as a crucial patch. Back then, the Federal Reserve opened its vaults, metaphorically, to extend swap lines that peaked at $580 billion, ensuring that banks worldwide could keep the lights on and the ATMs running. And why is this important? Because no one wants a repeat of the last time banks forgot how to bank. These currency swaps help stabilize global markets by providing a safety net when traditional funding sources seize up. They prevent the kind of panic that can turn a financial hiccup into a full-blown economic heart attack. But like any good insurance policy, they come with their own set of challenges. Coordinating these arrangements is a logistical nightmare, akin to herding cats who don't speak the same language and have different agendas. There are also political implications. Who gets access and who decides? It's like picking teams for dodgeball, but with the global economy hanging in the balance. The importance of these swap lines was underscored during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the European Central Bank activated them to ensure euro liquidity. Imagine the chaos if these safety nets weren't in place. Financial institutions scrambling like caffeinated squirrels, trying to hoard cash while the rest of the world watched their economies teeter on the edge. But here's the twist. What happens when interest rates dive into the negative territory? It's not a plot twist from a sci-fi novel. It's a reality we're grappling with. Central banks are venturing into this uncharted territory, where traditional financial rules are being rewritten. So, what happens next? Let's explore the world of negative interest rates, a realm where lending money could cost you and saving could feel like a financial faux pas. Imagine waking up one day to find that your bank, instead of rewarding you for saving, is now charging you for the privilege. As absurd as it sounds, this is the reality of negative interest rates. Picture this. You deposit money, expecting it to grow, only to watch it slowly shrink instead. This financial oddity turns the conventional wisdom of saving for a rainy day on its head, all in the name of economic stimulation. Negative interest rates are a tool central banks use when traditional methods, like slashing interest rates to near zero, fail to jumpstart a sluggish economy. The logic is simple, if somewhat counterintuitive. By penalizing savings, individuals and businesses are encouraged to spend or invest their money instead. This theoretically boosts consumption and investment, injecting life into stagnant economies. It's the economic equivalent of a cattle prod, giving that extra jolt to get things moving. However, this strategy is not without its controversies and unforeseen side effects. Critics argue that it punishes savers and can lead to asset bubbles as investors search for returns in riskier ventures. Moreover, it turns the banking world topsy-turvy, as banks, struggling to maintain their profit margins, might pass these costs on to customers. It's a bit like paying someone to store your old, dusty furniture in a leaky shed, frustrating and counterproductive. Take the European Central Bank's bold move in 2014. Faced with persistent low inflation and tepid economic growth, the ECB introduced negative rates, setting its deposit rate at -0.1%. This was a daring leap into uncharted waters, aimed at reviving the Eurozone's listless economy. It was like giving a caffeine shot to a sleep-deprived student the night before finals. Instant energy, but with unpredictable long-term effects. The hope was to spur lending, but it also led to grumbling from banks and savers alike, particularly in nations like Germany, where saving is practically a national pastime. Yet, the story doesn't end here. As the ECB and others experimented with negative rates, the question loomed, what happens if this control extends across the entire yield curve? Central banks manipulate long-term interest rates similarly to maintain economic balance. The prospect is as thrilling as it is daunting, opening the door to yield curve control, a tactic that could reshape financial landscapes like never before. Hold on to your seats, as this journey into the world of economic wizardry continues with an exploration of yield curve control and how it could redefine the rules of the financial game. Can central banks really dictate the entire spectrum of interest rates? It sounds like something out of a financial dystopia, yet through the mysterious alchemy of yield curve control, central banks attempt just that. Picture it as the monetary version of a puppeteer subtly pulling strings to orchestrate economic harmony. Yield curve control isn't about random tinkering. It's a calculated strategy to maintain accommodative borrowing conditions, ensuring that interest rates across different maturities align with their economic objectives. Think of it like this. Traditional monetary policy is like driving a car with the accelerator and brake. You speed up or slow down by adjusting short-term interest rates. But YCC adds a steering wheel to navigate the curves of the economy, targeting specific yield points on government bonds. The goal? To anchor long-term rates while keeping markets confident and credit flowing smoothly. It's the central bank's way of saying, relax, we've got this, while they discreetly nudge the economy toward desired outcomes. The Bank of Japan serves as the poster child for this approach. In 2016, faced with persistent deflation and a sluggish economy, the BOJ boldly targeted 10-year government bond yields at 0%. A move so audacious, it raised eyebrows worldwide. This wasn't just a shot in the dark. It was a calculated attempt to flatten the yield curve, reduce borrowing costs, and spur economic activity. And while the BOJ's policy initially seemed like a financial moonshot, it demonstrated an innovative way of maintaining control in turbulent times. However, yield curve control isn't without its critics. Some argue it distorts market dynamics, blurring the line between free markets and central planning. It's like a magician who reveals too much of the trick. Markets may lose faith in their predictive powers when central banks are so overtly involved. And then there's the elephant in the room, government debt. By keeping interest rates low, YCC can inadvertently encourage more borrowing, potentially inflating public debt to unsustainable levels. As we ponder these complexities, one can't help but wonder, if central banks can manipulate government bond yields, what's stopping them from casting their net wider? Imagine the implications of central banks purchasing non-government assets, corporate bonds, equities, perhaps even real estate. Welcome to the world of asset purchase programs, where the lines blur further and the questions multiply. Is this the new normal, or just a temporary fix in an ever-shifting economic landscape? Let's dive deeper into this next.